You're listening to episode 5 of Discography Discussion. I am Joe. That is Dan.
Yes.
Dude, what's going on?
Not too much.
So we're trying something new tonight.
Yeah, we're actually live streaming on the internet, which is different.
Hopefully everybody can hear what I'm saying, and if you can't, please tell me.
Yeah, because that would be kind of funny.
So we had to do kind of a famous Dan and Joe show 180. Everything we had planned, we had to change on the spot. So tonight, it's just me and Dan, and we are talking about A Plea for Purging.
Yes, we are.
So, Plea for Purging.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. One of my favorite bands. They're not really together anymore. I know they're reuniting for, I think it's Face Down Fest in California, which I do not have enough money to attend. So I will not be seeing that show. So the best I could come up with was to do a podcast.
So, A Plea for Purging is a band that you showed me kind of on a whim. I think the first album I heard was Depravity.
Yeah, Depravity was kind of where I was at the time. I had purchased their first album before, A Critique of Mind and Thought, but it was like a digital download. I bought it on iTunes, and I liked it for the most part, and I had it for about a year, but never really said much about it. I mean, it was just kind of what it was, And I thought it was pretty cool. But when Depravity came out, that was whenever we all kind of really started getting excited about the band, and they're becoming just kind of a big deal. Like we need to see this band live. We need to see what's up.
It's one of those records, big time.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely really affected me on a personal level. It was really aggressive and angry and negative. And
how can you be aggressive and angry and negative all at the same time? Although I guess they are kind of the same thing.
They are totally the same thing.
Well, one thing I noticed about Plea that I'm really into is all of their records, with maybe the exception of the first one, they all seem to be concept albums. I'm not sure that they're supposed to be. I know Depravity is, and I know The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is.
Right.
But that's one of their big points for me is it's like listening. You can put on one song that you like, or you can listen to the whole record. And most of the time, I want to listen to the whole record.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good, in a big chunk, for sure. I really enjoy listening to Depravity and Marriage of Heaven and Hell almost as if they're one giant album, because they're not that long, so they're easy to get through. And I feel like they really flow together really well. So I like that about the band, that their music can sometimes be seamless even between albums.
So what's your number one Plea for Purging song?
Number one?
Just pick one. You can listen to one Plea song. That's it. What is it?
Probably The Eternal Female.
Ooh. Mine changes between Malevolence and Music City.
Yeah, Music City's a good one too. Malevolence was like the first song I think we'd really... it was the first video I think that they had done.
Well, it was the first one we'd seen. I thought they did one for the Betrayers.
Did they?
But
it's
been a while since I've watched them. I know Andy Adkins, who is like the poster child of Plea. Like he became the mascot. Like Dan comes over to the house and says, "You need to hear this band. Like their whole focus is the fat guy."
Yeah, pretty much.
That was it. And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And like, no, like the singer. Like he's on their T-shirts. He's on their albums. He does all their promotional stuff online. He works for which metal magazine was it?
It wasn't a magazine. It was a merchandise company called Zambui, which I don't think even exists anymore, but they basically sold merch. And the first time I'd ever seen this dude was on a whole bunch of those videos that they put out.
Right.
And he was always at like live shows talking to bands. And there's actually a really good set of interviews where he was at Cornerstone one year walking around talking to all the bands. And this dude is just basically like a stand-up comedian / metal singer. They seem like the most serious people that you'll ever meet. Actually, really lighthearted and really funny in real life. On their records, you would think that they just walk around with frowns on their faces all the time, but the reality is that they're actually very funny people and have a very good self-depreciating sense of humor.
I remember the first time we went to see A Plea for Purging, the opportunity we had to go see them live. You had, it was Project 86, Plea for Purging. Was Sleeping Giant at that show?
Yes.
And I forget what tour it was supposed to be. But I walk in and the first band that played, their drummer had apparently disappeared. Like, I think he'd actually been eaten by Andy Adkins.
It was Corpus Christi.
And the drummer from Plea was sitting in with Corpus Christi for like one or two songs. And I just look and I see this huge guy, like arms to the equator, like in the front of the stage. And I had no idea that was the lead singer of Plea.
Yeah, he was wearing little tiny shorts.
Because when Plea went on second, this guy proceeds to lead the crowd in a band of aerobics.
Yeah, he just starts working out,
which
right
coined
there on stage
the term heavy aerobics.
Heavy aerobics.
Metal aerobics. It's the workout of, all the metalheads in the world.
Yep.
And I was just, it was not a sound that I had never heard before, but I liked the early days of Plea. They were a little less, and this is going to be a question I ask you later, they're a little less djent and a little more like melodic metal. But then you had this growling Andy Adkins just balk at the microphone. And it was something that in that combination that worked really well. And the first album I sat down and really listened to was Depravity.
Yeah.
And I remember just the first thing that caught my eye was, for those people that remember how great you felt after you saw The Dark Knight the first time, the soundtrack has this like overtone, the sound of electricity, like a halogen light is on in the room that runs through the entire album, and it leaves this tension on you. Depravity has the same thing going on.
Oh, for sure.
And it had a theme that they kept coming back to.
Yeah.
And it flowed together just almost perfect.
Yep, pretty close to perfect.
In a world where colors might be the perfect progressive album, concept album, Depravity comes pretty close.
Yeah.
And that's not their first album.
No, it's not.
And I know that Dan wants to go in order here, so tell me about the very first Plea for Purging album.
Okay, so they had put out a couple of demos before that, or EPs.
I have only heard these because you own them. I can't find them.
Yeah, one was called Dern. D-E-R-N.
Dern!
And there was another one that was called Steady is the Word, Quick is the Action.
And they had a different lead singer on that, I thought.
No, not that one. That one had Andy Adkins on it, but the first one, Dern, did not.
Okay.
It was some other guy, and he sounded not as good as Andy Adkins. I mean, it's really...
It was a little more, not emo, but you're in that...
Not
you're
emo,
in that
but
realm.
yeah. Just like your regular, like, hardcore vocalist. I mean, it was okay. There wasn't anything wrong with it, but it just was, I don't know. He wasn't the defining member of the band, so...
So what was the first thing that Andy Adkins was on?
That would be Quick is the Word, Steady is the Action, which is like a 7-song EP. I guess you could call it an album. I mean, it's kind of like whether or not you wanted to call Mortifications Break the Curse the first album or not. It's technically not the first album, but it is kind of... and it has almost all the same songs on it that A Critique of Mind and Thought had.
Which was their first album.
Which was their first official, record label.
Standout track on this album for pretty much everybody is The Betrayers.
Yeah, The Betrayers is awesome.
And I'm going to get this title wrong, but it's track 1. It's Vipers.
Vipers, Sons of Vipers, How Will You Escape the Judgment of Hell, I think it is.
Which was the first track I heard from Plea.
Yeah.
That was here's live Plea, Sons of Viper starts, and it's this just drop of heavy, like,
yeah, it's a slow build
if you're
up.
not in the mood, you're in the mood now.
Right. Yeah, it's a slow build up. And then just kind of breaks down right there in front of you. And if you're at the show, there's a gigantic man right in front of you doing aerobics.
Right.
And,
I mean, listen to this for 5 seconds.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
It starts off with that tense metal guitar and then just drops. Right?
Yep. It's interesting at the beginning of that song because it goes into the type of heaviness that we would become more accustomed to on albums like Depravity and Marriage of Heaven and Hell. But the funny thing about this album is this album doesn't really sound like this. It's kind of a red herring, so to speak.
Right.
Because literally when the band kicks in, you start realizing what this record's all about. And it is about frantic, complex, soloing, fret-destroying metal.
So the question I'm going to ask you later, and probably on every album, because it falls under... A Plea falls under a category where, depending on which album was the last one you heard, you'll either say, "Oh, they're djent" or they're melodic metal. So, is Plea djent on this one?
No, for sure not.
Definitely not.
They're more in your vein of. It sounds to me, especially with the vocals and how they sound, it seems more like old school hardcore, and I don't really mean old school. I mean, I don't know, like something like No Innocent Victim or something or like Terror or something like in that vein. Like half the band is old school hardcore, and the other half is like they only listen to Iron Maiden.
Is it the band as a whole or Andy Adkins that talks about this album in a negative tone?
Oh, I don't know if he does or not. I haven't.
I just know
seen that.
I've read in interviews with the band that they had talked about that this was the record that they wish they hadn't let the label push them the way that they were pushed, and they learned their lesson with the next one. But I don't really have complaints about this record. It is a very solid, very well put together, very well played first album.
Yeah, I mean it's great for a debut. I mean, it sounds like, I've definitely heard debut records that are way worse than this, and
right.
This doesn't sound amateurish. Maybe a little bit in the songwriting, as there's a whole lot of like play this part for 15 seconds and then move on to the next part, you know.
Well,
but
that's what it comes up with this type of metal, though.
Yeah, I mean it's not uncommon. I don't have any real issue with it. It's just it's a heavy, mostly hardcore record with a lot of metal influences on it. My only issue with it is that it sounds a little bit flat in the production quality. It doesn't punch like it should punch in the heavy parts, and I'm only saying that in comparison to what came later.
Right.
You know,
I would equate this
sonically
album's production to what you would similarly get out of Slayer.
Sure.
More mid-heavy, more about getting the tone across than the punch that metal albums are supposedly known for.
Right. I mean, sonically, it's good. It's just, it's kind of all mixed, you know, kind of together in such a way to where it really doesn't, I don't know. It's hard to criticize because there's nothing wrong with the production on this record whatsoever. Right. It sounds great. It's just, I feel like the band compromised a little bit of heaviness, just more, like it was mixed more for the soloing guitarist,
right?
Than it was your more bass heavy drops.
You got there before I could get there. Is this the guitar player's album?
For sure. I mean, and some Plea fans, they think that A Critique of Mind and Thought is the best Plea album. You know, they didn't really appreciate the direction the band went in on Depravity. And I could see that. I mean, if you're a big time guitar guy and all you want to hear is melodic solos and just all around craziness, I think that's fine. The only real criticism I have of this record though is the vocals. again, absolutely 100% get the job done. There's nothing wrong with the vocals on this record.
But you're going to say dynamics, aren't you?
However, no, I'm not going to say dynamics. His voice sounds very forced. Like I don't know if he had screamed before this record or before the EP that came before it. But his vocals are somewhat rough on that one as well. And maybe he just had a sore throat that week. I don't know. However, what I hear a lot of straining. His voice sounds very rough and not in a good way, like not in a controlled way. More like I'm out of breath and having trouble getting through the songs. And maybe that's why, he started doing aerobics, before shows. I don't know.
Well, judging by the rest of the album and the way that the rest of the production sounds, I'm not 100% sure that it would be him, but I'm like you. I'm comparing it to what comes later.
Right.
Because one thing about Plea that arguably you will find is that they get beefier as time goes on. Personally, I kind of feel like the Marriage of Heaven and Hell takes a step backwards, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we might disagree on that one, but
I mean, solid album, right?
Sure. I mean, I love a critique of Mind and Thought. For a long time, I had a blog that was called "The Critique of Mind and Thought." I mean, it was still a great record. The Betrayers is probably my favorite song on there. There's just this melodic. There's kind of this melodic break or bridge or whatever you want to call it in that song towards the end that just really gets my blood pumping, and I love it. There's a Hymn of Praise is my other favorite one on that one. And it's a very melodic, fast-paced, very guitar solo-y song.
All right.
I mean, the guitars are just all over this record. And not like in a crunch, but it's just solos, man. It's like they're competing with each other or something.
Well, I'm going to take an early stand on this one and say that the follow-up, Depravity, that's the Plea for Purging masterpiece.
Oh, you think that one's the best album?
I think it is. It's something about, again, I've mentioned this before, I'm your concept album guy.
Right.
When it's done right, a concept album is what you want to hear.
Sure, I get that.
And I still honestly don't know if this is intended to be a concept album, but the way the music flows, the way there are themes that they come back to, it will catch you off guard and force you to listen to it.
Yeah.
From the very first phrase that you hear through the album when they go back to it.
Right.
And they go back to that theme more than once. It reminds you that you're listening to a performance. You're not listening to a band. And there's a difference there. And I mentioned it earlier. It's got that overtone. I think Liberate could claim the same thing. It's not that it feels dirty, it sounds dirty, but it has something that ties it all together.
Well, I agree with everything you just said. I do remember listening to Depravity because I've got the unique position of coming from a critique of Mind and Thought to Depravity. And the changes, honestly, I wasn't 100% prepared for. This band was very... I thought of them as more of like a metal band, like almost like a more fun-loving kind of band.
Right.
And so Depravity comes in and it's so dark and it's heavy and it's depressing and that's not bad. I love that about it. However, it's just, it starts off and the band achieves a level of heaviness that was not really even hinted at on a critique of Mind and Thought. It gets, more in that like Meshuggah-ish vein where it's like heavy and technical, and to accent the heaviness there's like bass drops in the mix.
Absolutely.
And
staple of modern metal is the bass drop.
Absolutely.
That's right, we stole it from techno. Deal with it.
Right, and it sounds great in this case. And I love how the record starts off very kind of slow and melodic, and that little piece of music is repeated several times throughout the record, just to remind you that, hey, we're trying to tie this all together with a common theme, not only lyrically but musically. And really this record has hints of the old Plea. I think this one was a little bit more solo-y than the next record. They played like, if you listen to Malevolence, that's still that song maybe sounds the most like the old Plea out of all of them, just because there's a lot more intricate guitar work on there. It's not just straight, let's syncopate these riffs with the bass and the drum to be like so perfect that it just hits like a blunt force. That song's still a little bit more organic and kind of flows.
Right.
And the one thing that's interesting too is that the songs on A Critique of Mind and Thought were not particularly memorable.
With exception, but yes.
Right, with a couple of exceptions. But the songs on Depravity all stand apart from one another, and you can tell the difference between songs very easily because there is a little bit more of a structure there. There are repeated choruses, and and again, typically that's a bad thing in this kind of music. But with Depravity, it really works. They crafted real songs out of this like metal mold,
Right. And I mean, you can call it what you want, but I'm gonna answer the question again. Is Plea djent on this album?
A little bit. I take issue with djent because I think it's just kind of a dumb term.
Why is that?
I don't know, because like the term, it isn't, it's not Latin for anything or anything like that. It's just djent is literally like, I think, called that because like, oh well, man, it makes a djent sound when they play. That's like literally the terminology.
I think it was actually Dan who said one time, it's not djent. It's Meshuggah.
Right. To me, when
the
somebody
term
says
exists because of Meshuggah, so let's just call it Meshuggah style, and nobody will want to be that.
Right, like bands like Meshuggah or the Acacia Strain, and
right,
those kind of bands, you have a particular sound, and Plea does borrow kind of liberally from that sound.
And there are aspects of the band that will sneak in, and this is the last album with both guitarists.
Yes,
they're down to one on the next one.
Yes, and you can definitely tell.
You get the feeling that, kind of like when Head parted ways with Korn, and you got the feeling of, okay, that's the part of the music that Monkey wrote from that day on.
Hey, man, that's next week.
Hey, we're going to get to that. Believe we're going to get to that.
Yep.
But you get the feeling of, okay, this is the guy who hammers home
all the solos,
the djent, the djent aspects of it. But Depravity, it can make you feel sick and then make you feel good.
Yeah, it's melodic. I wouldn't necessarily say it ever makes me feel good. Typically, I'm usually in a bad mood when I'm done listening to Depravity.
It kind of makes me listen. I guess that's what I mean.
Yeah, but I mean, it's 100% enjoyable,
100.
From beginning to end. Really, my only criticism with Depravity is in the songwriting itself, and that's that occasionally it does get a little repetitive.
Right.
There's a few too many, oh God, what have we done's in Malevolence. There's a little too many, can you see it? Can you feel it? There's too many, you couldn't stop this if you tried. It goes on and on. But I think this is just a growing pain in trying to basically craft listenable, memorable songs out of, technical metal,
See, that's interesting because I always interpreted it as part of the theme.
Well, and that could be too.
I mean, what does the term depravity mean? And that was kind of what they're hammering into.
Right.
With, they're repetitive. They repeat lyrics on different songs.
Right.
Musical themes come back. So part of that makes me want to listen to it as a whole. And I guess that's the difference that I'm hearing is, they're trying to make memorable stuff, but it was also tied into a theme.
Yeah, it was tied into a theme.
But it all works.
Yeah, I mean, I love Depravity. I don't know if I think it's their best one, but I do really enjoy it, and it really got me excited about the band in a way that I really wasn't excited when A Critique of Mind and Thought was on. I mean, A Critique of Mind and Thought was great, and the band was good, but it was just another good band. It wasn't like something that I was like, oh my God, I can't wait until they put something out. After I heard Depravity, I was like, I want the next 3 albums right now. Because I was just so excited by what I was hearing, And
so about the next record.
So the next record is called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And so this is Depravity Part 2 for the most part. It carries on very much in the same vein. The only difference is that on this record, we've kind of abandoned the, twinkly guitar sound, I guess, like we
are down to
the
one.
the solos, the shred. It's not really there on this record. They've gone full into let's be as heavy as humanly possible, and get more syncopated,
right,
and create more of a blunt force trauma than
to the face,
right, than necessarily to ease people into things. And so this record is, believe it or not, it's actually my personal favorite of them.
Really?
Yeah.
My interpretation of this record, every time I listen to it, I mean, the first song is The Reaper.
Yeah, the Eternal Female.
The Eternal Female. But then I kind of fall off for a minute, and then The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is like the best middle of an album I can think of.
Oh yeah, I
Because
mean,
once you start the middle, you got about 4 or 5 songs before you want to stop listening. But
right.
I can throw out the beginning and the end.
Really?
And again, not every time, but that's kind of the trap that this album throws me in. If I want to listen to a song, I can listen to that song. But if I start listening to The Fall, I'm stuck. I'm in for at least 4 more tracks, and I really don't know why that is.
It's the singing, Joe.
Oh. Well, so there you go. Dan, ladies and gentlemen, has pointed it out for me.
This was the first record that A Plea for Purging like really sang. They did have one song on A Critique of Mind and Thought where they were singing, but it was more like a chorus, like a choir type. It was gang singing.
Well, this is the type of opening that you're a big fan of.
Yeah, so this album, if you didn't know, is about like televangelists and about like prophet teachers and stuff, like people that basically teach in their religion that God, like how much money you have is a reflection of like how much faith in God you have, which we all know is total BS. However,
recurring theme there, Dan.
Well, it's
with you personally.
Yeah, well, it's just ridiculous. It's like it's whatever. It's like people take enough issue with religion anyway.
And you have to perpetuate this stereotype.
Right. It's like, really, dude? Really? So that's what this record's about, is about that. He even says in the Eternal Female, like, our prisons were built with the songs of hope. Whorehouses are built with the, oh wow, I don't remember what the next lyric is. Anyway, but it's about religion, how it's bad and stuff, like, at least that type of religion. We're not really here to make a stance on this show, but basically, this record is very angry in that regard. So the entire thing is loaded with clips of televangelists talking. And then again, I'm a sucker for that. I love it. It just really, it puts a smile on my face. I mean, it starts off with a preacher like screaming all this stuff, and then Plea comes in and he just, I am the Reaper, and it's just, and the song goes literally insane after that. I mean, It's just, it's heavier than Depravity even. I mean, it's a lot like Depravity. It's just, the way I described it to someone today was that Depravity is great. And The Marriage in Heaven and Hell is Depravity Part 2 with everything turned up to 11. It's that much more aggressive. It's that much, more angry. It's that much more, like sonically just jolting.
I guess I just disagree.
Yeah. See,
I wish I could have a more in-depth conversation than that, but I straight up, I think I just disagree. But it's a good album. I still can't call it bad.
Right. Well, I think the
It's just
concept.
not my favorite.
I think the concept really carries it for me. The way you have a personal attachment to the concept on Depravity,
Right.
I have a personal attachment to the concept on the Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So, it really, I think it's really just it really depends on who you are.
So it's like the
You know.
definition of, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right. I think the
You find that thing that you latch onto personally. It's like, oh, yep, that's my record right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on who you are. I don't think that one of the records is necessarily better than the other because they are still different enough. Obviously, they're different enough for Joe and I to have a differing opinion on. And
Right.
and I agree with what Joe says. As far as the songs on the Marriage of Heaven and Hell may not be as complex, or they may not be as insane as they are on Depravity, because Depravity had two basically principal guitarists. Therefore, you have the potential for a little bit more complexity and, dare I say it, dynamics. For as much as I talk about dynamics and how much I love dynamics, the Marriage of Heaven and Hell is not as dynamic of a record as Depravity. The only thing that they do to create any dynamics, is that you get about 4 songs in, and you're basically hearing a similar experience to what you had on Depravity, minus the solos. Okay? And then you get to The Fall, track 5, and then all of a sudden they're playing, you get about 2 minutes in or whatever, and then all of a sudden they introduce the very first melodic sung chorus that they've ever done. And it's done so well and so seamless that it sacrifices no heaviness. They're not like, okay, guys, we're going to slow it down here for a minute or anything like that. It still attacks you with full force, but it makes you feel kind of good too. It's kind of that what's the word I'm looking for, Joe?
Onslaught.
No, not onslaught. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just it's that happy feeling I guess people get when they hear singing and all they've been listening to is screaming.
I think that would be like a release.
Yeah,
like
kind
resolve.
of. Yeah,
the tension resolves itself.
Right, and this is the first time it's done that in 2 albums.
Absolutely.
And they even said, A Plea For Purging used to be a much more melodic band, and you can hear that on A Critique of Mind and Thought. It's much more melodic. And so they said in order to make up for that, they decided to start singing on the Marriage of Heaven and Hell,
right?
Because the music didn't really provide the melody as much anymore, which is interesting.
Yeah, I don't even need to ask the question that I said I was going to ask for every record. Because if you're catching the recurring theme here, Plea is not djent.
No,
they're just not. Being rhythmic does not make you djent.
Right.
And that's something that I wish everybody that listens to this type of metal would figure out. Just because the guitarist and the drummer and the bass player are in sync, that's called a good rhythm section.
Right. It's called being solid.
That's called being in control of your music. That's called practicing. It's not djent. You can't be djent and melodic at the same time.
No, not at all.
No, you cannot. So,
or can you?
Ooh, hang on a minute. Are you trying to say that the next one is going to be... No, you're not saying that.
I might be saying that.
So
The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, final thoughts. I think it's a great record.
100%.
And I...
98% for me.
Yeah, it is. It's my favorite Plea record. It's the heaviest one. And I think it's a more realization of the band's sound. Depravity, I still feel like had the growing pains from the coming off of the record before it, and I think this record was definitely more of a realization of how the band's vision was.
So I'm going to do my best here to get Dan started off on the right foot. You ready for this? Album number 4. The Life and Death of A Plea for Purging.
Yes.
So you want to tell the story? Because I remember seeing the album.
Yeah.
I remember buying the album. I remember listening to the album with you
Yep.
and I believe Brian.
Yep.
And I said, dude, please going away. I'm sad.
Yeah. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Well, the album is called The Life and Death of a Plea for Purging. Either they're being funny or...
Which is a total possibility for this band.
Yeah, absolutely, but it didn't even sound that way. It sounded like this is the payoff to everything we've done as a group, everything our fans have given us, and this is us saying thank you.
Right, it's the swan song.
And it really is that.
It is.
So what happened? I think the last tour was the Quit Your Band and Get a Job tour.
It's called Quit Your Band and Get a Job tour, yeah. And unfortunately, I was not able to see that either.
But we'd seen Plea a few times.
Yeah, we'd seen him a couple times before and had a great time.
So if this is the swan song, if this is the payoff to everything else they've done, it definitely fills those shoes.
Absolutely.
Everything that you would have turned up to 11, save for the early melodicness, more, a little bit more of the critique of Mind and Thought, everything's turned up. His vocals are turned up, the drums are turned up.
Yeah.
And I don't even mean volume, I mean just the quality.
Everything's stepped up a notch.
And it was like, I appreciate that because that's the story that every band wants to tell. Like, we put all this effort in and we're not going to do this anymore. We should go out with a bang and go out huge. And
Right.
Plea actually pulls it off.
Yeah, they do. This record is heavy, just like the previous record. But it's really melodic.
If you've never listened to Plea, I have to tell you, don't listen to this one first.
Right, because the other ones may not.
It will put a bad taste in your mouth on the other albums.
Right. And that's not even to say the other albums are bad. It just kind of sets the bar so high. If this band decides to reunite in 5 years, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to top this.
Well, if they choose to reunite, they better be ready to keep stepping high, if you know what I mean.
Right, because this record is fantastic.
For 4 albums, I mean, when you can almost give the band a perfect score, and I know we haven't been scoring them, but
right, we don't really score bands.
I mean, when they're all in the upper 90s,
yeah,
I mean that's almost perfect as far as your satisfaction. It's almost like there's very little risk listening to Plea if you're a fan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they're an easy band to get into, too, with their funny videos.
It may even make you sad if you discover them now.
Right.
Because if they're done, and they're not coming back.
Right.
But you never say never. And I definitely wouldn't say never. And I'm going to skip the question and just say it. Again, Plea is not djent.
The record, it's funny, the production on this is a little different too, though. The bass is turned up quite a bit, so like whenever they hit those really hard breakdowns, it sounds like a basketball almost, like hitting
right,
like hitting you in the face. I was saying there's a song on here called I think it's My Song. I can't remember which one it is.
Track 5, My Song,
or it's Skin and Bones. I can't remember. I don't remember which one it is, but it sounds like you're like in a high school gym, and when the riffs kick in, it basically sounds like you're getting hit in the face by an automatic basketball serving machine. It's just over and over and over and over again. And I love that sound. It's very almost has like an electronic sound to it, and that's the sound of perfect syncopation, kids. It's just they were so on the ball and so tight.
I would be very disappointed to find out that they quantized their stuff.
Yeah.
Because when I listen to Plea, I don't hear computer manipulation. I hear, that was good, do it again.
Yeah.
That was good, do it again. That was perfect. All right, Andy, it's your turn.
Well, and the fact that I've seen them do it live, I've seen them perform these songs live. You know what I mean? Like,
yes,
they're doing it. So, if they did it on the record, okay, whatever. But I don't worry about that as much. All I worry about most of the time is just what I ended up getting in my hands. And in this case, I mean, the record starts off heavy as all balls, and then it kind of scoots over into this more melodic section. There's more melodic singing on this record than any other Plea record, but it's not like a weak album. I mean, it's not It's not, it doesn't drag. There are melodic sections sometimes in between songs, but they keep those pretty brief. Those are typically only like a minute 50 or something.
Right. I listened to this record a lot, and I thought the last two had a concept. Man, I wish this had a concept. And I don't know when I caught it.
Yeah,
but I think there is a concept to this. You tell me if I'm right. It's that Hollywood starlet story of we find you want to be a star, so you set out and you go to Music City, you go to Hollywood, you want to make it big, and then you make it big, but then you decide it's not for you. And I don't have it perfect, but they're not just talking about themselves, but they're talking about themselves. Like, well, kind of we went out on a high note, that sort of thing.
I wouldn't necessarily make it as complicated as that. I think it's just literally what the title says. It's the life and death. It's the ups and downs. It's there's a lot of things about that they
I'll
loved.
Go with that.
Yeah, that they loved about being in the band, and then there was personal tragedy that put a huge strain on the band members, and I think it just covers that whole gamut of what it's like to be in a band that's on the road.
Which you've never tried it is quite taxing.
Right. Yeah, it can really take its toll on you. And I definitely think there's a progression. I think the beginning starts off more positive, and by the end it definitely gets less positive. But it never achieves the same level of negativity that was on Depravity or on The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. So I mean it's really here's this word again. It's more dynamic than any of the other albums. And it's, sometimes I want to call this one my personal favorite. However, there's just something about how heavy The Marriage of Heaven and Hell is that keeps me on board just as a metal fan.
Yeah, when I listen to this record, I always say the same thing to myself. This is the payoff for being a fan. This is my reward for liking the other albums and listening to the other albums. This is my payoff.
Well, yeah, and it's not. They don't skimp out either. It's like 14 songs. I mean, it's
right.
It's not like a little 10-track thing, and it doesn't. But it somehow doesn't drag. They keep it interesting through the whole thing. And I guess that's just one of those things where, okay, well, we don't have to continue to keep writing material, I guess. So we're just gonna polish up everything that we have and make it as nice as we can. And this is what we got. And I got nothing bad to say about this record. Or this band. I wish they would get back together. I enjoy their stuff.
Is that your final thought on Plea for Purging? Like, I wish they'd get back together?
I wish they'd get back together, yeah, for sure.
I'm going to say there's a small group out there that won't be into this style. But if you give it a chance, you can't go wrong with Plea. Just don't listen to the life and death first, or you might be giving it the wrong chance.
Right.
Well, dude, I'd call this episode finished.
Yeah, we're good.
Thanks for tuning in, and for everybody watching live, we appreciate it as well.
Well, hey, Joe, do you have an album of the week?
Oh, do I have an album of the week? In preparation for listening to Korn, I was listening to Korn.
Nice.
And then I remembered that Korn was accused of being the band that created nu metal.
Yes.
So I asked myself, what is nu metal? And then I got busy doing something else at work. So this week I've been listening, my album of the week, Faceless by Godsmack.
Interesting.
Because when I need to go back and focus and not worry about anything, I throw on some Godsmack. So Listen to Faceless. What do you got?
I've been listening a lot to He Is Legend. And the album, they have several albums. We'll actually end up talking about them at some point. But I'm listening to It Hates You by He Is Legend, which is just an amazing hard rock record. I had to take a little bit of a break from metal because, I listened to Slayer for like a month straight. And then,
I know. That'll take it out of you.
And then Plea For Purging and Zao before that. And just, it's just I've been so metal I can't even take a bath without sinking to the bottom of the tub,
Wasn't that your goal in life, to be as metal as possible?
I guess it was. at some point. So that's my album of the week. Check it out if you want to.
And on that note, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. We are on Google Play Music. We are on iTunes. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on TuneIn Radio. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next week.